Good evening. I would like to call the Maplewood Planning Commission to order on Tuesday, August 17th. Roll call. You can start either way.
Cheryl Spokey here.
Lou Yang, present.
Tushar Desai, present.
Paul Arbuckle present.
Fred Dom, present.
John Eads, present.
Looks like we have everybody tonight, don't we, or are we missing? Okay. The approval of the agenda. Any corrections or additions? Been a motion by Allen.
Second.
Second by Deshar. All those in favor?
Aye.
Right.
Hearing all ayes, passed. Approval of the minutes. Any corrections or additions from July 20th?
I didn't see anything. Anybody else?
No, really.
I move that we approve the minutes as stated.
There's been a motion by Fred,
Second.
second by Lou. All those in favor?
Aye.
One abstention.
One abstention. Other than that, all ayes. Passed.
Wasn't here last week.
Okay, we are at public hearing E.
We don't have anything for a public hearing.
Yep, no public hearings today.
No,
Nothing?
no
Okay.
public hearing.
Okay, we will move on to F, new business. Number 1, zoning text amendment, dynamic, I think that's how you say it, dynamic LED sign. Staff?
All right. Good evening, Chair and Commission. So ISD 622 has submitted a request to allow dynamic displays on school property that is located within the R1 single dwelling residential zoning district. Currently, the city's code does not permit dynamic displays in residential districts. Dynamic displays are permitted in our business commercial district, our business commercial modified district, light manufacturing and heavy manufacturing districts as well. The city's last update to the sign code was in 2010. Over the years, the city's received requests from educational and religious facilities to install dynamic displays in residential areas. And up until now, we haven't received a formal request to actually change the code. So tonight, staff would like to have just a broader discussion with the Planning Commission about whether or not we wish to amend the code as it relates to dynamic displays, and if so, what specifically would the Commission like to see in a new ordinance. And so in preparation for the discussion, we did include some information from other cities in your report that I'm sure you've had a chance to take a look at. A summary of each city's code was included. And at the end of the discussion, staff seeks feedback and direction from the Planning Commission on how you'd like to proceed. So there's a couple options. We can do nothing, meaning that we would bring this back to you for a formal public hearing next month and make a recommendation to deny the request based on the fact that you don't want to amend the code. As an alternative, we can look at potential updates to the current code, which could allow for these types of signs in areas where you would deem appropriate. The one thing, though, to keep in mind is that we can't essentially approve their request, which would just solve for them and only them. So we would have to look at this more broadly for all institutional uses in residential areas and determine if that's something that we want to see. So with that, we can start the discussion and take some notes and go from there. If you have specific questions, the applicants are here if you have specific questions for them as well.
I definitely think it's important that we do have some type of standard because we need a lot of people coming in and trying to do different experiences from the original what it is. What did you guys think? Did you guys read over that? That seems like White Bear is really, really stringent on their rules. I don't think we're going to go that direction. What's a NITS? What is the standard for that? What is that? A candle?
Oh, nits.
Nits? Is that a?
I
foot
am not
candle.
sure. But it is a way to measure.
They're laughing at me back
It
there.
is a way to measure light. Brightness.
I know it is, but what is the categorized to, I guess, I guess that was,
It's like foot candles. It's in here somewhere, but they can answer back there when
Yeah.
it's.
when it's their turn.
It's something we can look into if you're.
Okay.
What else would be in the R1 zoning district that might want to have signs like this? I can think of churches, schools.
Yes.
Anything else come to mind?
Chair and commission, those are the two main issues, or not issues, the two main uses that we would see down the road. There are other non-residential uses in commercial areas, but I don't think it would be something that we'd want to pursue necessarily if there's an old existing commercial or industrial use in an area, something like that. We wouldn't want to necessarily allow a dynamic display. And generally speaking, they're all the institutional uses are in residential areas. There was a map included in your report too. I don't know how well it will show up on the screen. Yeah, not very well.
So Elizabeth, did you just, let me clarify what you said. You said you do not think that we should do it in commercial areas, just within the residential, or?
What I'm saying is if there are, and I'm not aware of any right now, so I'll just state that. I'm not aware if there are any existing commercial, non-residential uses in a residential zone. I'm assuming there probably isn't, or if there is, there's maybe a few. But we would be looking at the institutional uses that are allowed in residential areas, which is non-residential, but it's not a residential use, it's an institutional use that's zoned residential.
Right, in that area.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
And also, these uses too, I should add, typically require, they do require a conditional use permit. So there would be a chance for them to come before you as well for the conditional use permit. And so that would be a time where they could also do a dynamic display or something if there was a new one.
What would be the disadvantage to having it in commercial? That seems like that would be, other than when I talked about people seeing them and being distracted and driving to buildings, but.
So they're already allowed in a couple of our commercial districts and our manufacturing districts. So what I was referring to is if there are any existing commercial uses in residential districts, which I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
So we do allow them in our two commercial districts and our manufacturing districts. And the standards that were included in your report, those are only applicable to those districts. So where these signs are already allowed.
Okay.
I would like to suggest that we review the current one or update the current one and bring it back for discussion, Yeah.
What is the timeline for these guys to get going that they want to have these signs put up? I guess if we delay this another 60 days, is that going to create an issue for them? Or, I guess that's a question we need to ask them too, I guess.
Chair and Commission, I would defer that question to them. I'm getting the impression that they are anxious to get going on this. We've already been looking at other signage for a few different school properties. So I'm assuming they would like to get these going, relatively soon as well, if the city decides to change the code and proceed with an actual text amendment that would allow them in some manner. Now, what that's going to look like, that's what I want to discuss with you, is if there are specific things. If you want to proceed with the text amendment, are there specific things you would like to see in that ordinance as far as how it governs dynamic displays? Setbacks, height standards, brightness standards. And if you don't have, maybe you don't know what a nit is or the foot candles or, those types of questions, we can look into those as staff in the meantime if you want us to bring a new ordinance to you and define those better for you.
Right, because there was a huge range. There was like, someone had down to 200 and then all the way up to 5,000, so there's a huge range.
Yeah, and I think the one you're referring to maybe it was different for.
The day and night.
What was that?
The day and night time and
Yes,
daytime.
exactly. So, and that's, Chair and Commission, that is a common theme of cities, and we looked at other ones, we just, wanted to not include them all, but a common theme was, where it would get the dimming capability. They would have the light be not quite as bright at nighttime, usually after sunset or by 10 o'clock or something like that.
Were any cities that did not allow it at all, that when you did the research?
There was only one, I believe, in here. They allowed them in other areas. But no, I think most places do allow them, but they allow them with specific standards and with like a special use permit or a conditional use permit, they call them different things.
Right, right.
But
So I would at least say that we should have the city bring back a proposal for us. I think this is a necessity to have this type of signs even in a residential area. But I'm definitely concerned about the fact that the particular school, when I look at their layout, there is residences right across the street from where this sign would go up. So there is a very critical requirement in my book to say, what should be the size of that sign? How is it positioned? So that, you are hoping that that sign does not reflect light directly into their homes during evening hours or early in the morning when schools are on and it's still dark out there. So that's something that we would like you guys to bring back to us as a proposal. There's a lot of cities that are already allowing it. I'd even like to see some kind of a survey from those cities and say, okay, if you got a sign in front of a residential area today, what kind of feedback have you received from the residences there? Is it working well? Is it not working well? If it's not working, what's wrong with it? Was it too big of a sign, too wide, too tall, very much higher than it should normally be? So those are the types of things that should be used to develop the regulation and bring it back to us so that we can take a look at it and say, yep, does it make sense or does it not? And I would also like the residents across from the school that they're proposing this sign to be informed of it now and say, hey, look, the school is looking for this, give us your feedback.
Right.
Because if they give us that feedback, then we also know, are they in favor of it or not? And if not, why not? So that we can make a better decision from those facts, because I think it's a foregone conclusion that we got to have it.
yes.
I don't think we can get by without it. It's now a matter of what do we put up there.
So Chair and Commission, I will clarify one thing. If you decide that you want to proceed with a text amendment, that would be the first step. So we would have to first amend the code. Each individual property would still be responsible for applying for a conditional use permit for a dynamic display, if that's the route we end up going.
And
So
that
they
would
would come
come
back
back.
to you again
Yes, got it.
for that process, which would include a public hearing where we would notify all the property owners within 500 feet.
So you can't do a broad approval for each school that they're doing. It has to be each individual school.
Conditional use permits are tied to the property.
Okay.
So it's very specific to each individual property. It runs with the property as long as the conditions are adhered to. So they couldn't just the school district couldn't come in and apply for multiple properties and just have them approved as one approval. They would be separate. Now, that's not to say they couldn't do them at the same time.
Right.
And,
Which they would.
come to the same planning commission meeting, but each property would be treated as its own individual public hearing.
Okay.
But we should still have some guidelines developed and established in the city code so that we say, hey, so many lumens is all we are going to allow from a sign. Or it should be so many feet away from the road.
Correct.
Where they are posting it and at a certain angle. And so those are the types of things, height and so on, so that whoever applies to us has some basic guidelines in front of them up front so that they don't steer too far away from those guidelines in making the proposal and bringing it to us as a CUP to approve.
Right, and we have some in place already for our dynamic displays. So we do have setbacks and standards in place in our existing ordinance, which was the last couple pages in your report. Those would have to be, redlined, and we'd have to make some amendments, and that's what we would essentially bring to you.
Correct.
So,
You kind of wanted some input from us also too, kind of what you thought would be the best suggestions too, right?
exactly. That's why I'm here, is I want to know if this is something you're even interested in, and that's what it sounds like. It sounds like you're willing to entertain the idea. And if it is something you're interested in, then we will prepare a draft ordinance and bring that to you for consideration and to the city council after that.
I guess they'd be the one I'd probably have some questions to, because the thing about the facing of it too, I mean, if you face them, this way to the street, it's not shining across the street, but I don't know what the
Yeah.
visual effect of that is too, because most of their signs here showed that they were facing towards the street.
I included, so they did include 3 different examples. So in this situation, it's on a corner, so it's facing one of the streets.
But the previous one also was, if I'm correct, not mistaken, it's facing a home too across the street. So.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and so that's where some of my concern would be, okay, if it's facing that home, how is that impacting the lighting to the windows of that house?
And so that, Chair and Commission, that is something that we could address through a setback. It could also be addressed in a setback from the property line, but also a setback from an adjacent residential property. Currently, our code is 100 feet, I believe.
Never worked for half the schools.
So you'd have to kind of think about, what do you think is a reasonable setback?
Right.
So that it could potentially, they could, find a location for it. Our existing one, again, is for commercial areas adjacent to residential. So that's the difference there. This would be in residential areas. So these signs would be next to residential homes. That's certainly something you want to consider.
Well, they definitely need to be parallel. I think makes more sense to me, but I guess when they come up, I guess that would, because then you can see it from both ways, and not just when you're driving by to see just the face of it. I mean, this side here, the back side is the people inside the building can look at it, but,
Yeah.
Corner, that's why it's.
Oh,
like
that's
that.
why it's turned that way.
I do just have a clarifying question. So in changing the code, would that just be subject to the institutional properties and residential areas, or would the code change for all commercial and everything else as well? Would there be 2 separate codes or just one?
Right now, the way it's laid out, we only have, the way our code is laid out right now, we have individual districts separated throughout the sign code. So it'll say, signs permitted in the business commercial district. And it will list dynamic displays and reference this section of the code.
Okay.
And so if they're permitted in that district, then they have to meet this section of the code. So something that we would want to consider, and that's something we can maybe discuss next time, or if you have any thoughts on it right now, is, for example, how our existing code for commercial versus residential, do you have any concerns, or would you like to see any differences, or would you like it to be all uniform and the same?
Perfect. That's what I was trying to
Yep.
get at.
Yep.
Because one example specifically, and I could have missed this in our code, but I didn't jump out at me, but it's explicitly stated in some of the other cities provided, was around sound emission. So like in residential areas, for me personally, having a sign that does not emit sound would be
Absolutely.
even more important than in a commercial area, but ideally, we wouldn't want sound emissions anyways, would be my guess, but, or my thought, but.
What do you think they're talking about? Like the bulbs going zzz, or?
No, like, I feel like I've gone by signs and it'll play like a little music ditty or something like that, or announcements, or,
You wanted to play like trumpets?
yeah, that definitely, I don't think neighbors would want to be woken up by that.
Wake up call.
And less so for this particular application, but thinking more broadly of changing the code, and especially when a lot of the institutional areas, while there are some residential, they're also by a lot of commercial properties, so therefore, it's like, does everyone start getting on this new signed bandwagon that then creates?
Chair and Commission, I would imagine that there will be other religious or educational facilities that would want to install these signs, just based on what I've been told, as far as there's been requests over the years. And I know I worked in a previous city, or I worked in another city previously where they were allowed and would get calls regarding them. And so I think there is a demand
Yeah.
or, a desire, I should say, on the behalf of certain types of facilities to have these types of signs on their property. And the question is, if you feel that they are appropriate for these areas, if you have specific requirements, and setbacks, in terms of, the length of time an image is displayed. I know that was something that was very common in many of these ordinances. If you have any thoughts on that, or, if you would just like us to bring you something, we can do that too. But if you did have any thoughts that you'd like us to consider as we prepare that, now would be a good time to let us know.
Well, I do think it's important that we are aware of the daylight and the night for how bright they are, because it's, you know, if it's dark out and those things are still full blast, and it's gonna make, you know, pretty bright. And I think it's important the way that they face too, but I'd like to ask them, because I do think that if it's facing parallel, not perpendicular, that it's gonna be not shining directly into the houses. And that we need to have a size limit too.
One house is parallel, is another house is perpendicular.
If it's on a corner, yeah,
Right.
right.
I looked up too, and then 250 nits is just for, so everybody knows, is about like a laptop computer screen. So it's not real bright. And that's what they're proposing at night, is it would dim back to 250, which would be very visible. And the only reason it ramps up during the day is because the ambient lighting, in order to see it, it has to. So,
And I've looked at this dynamic display sign ordinance that we have in Maplewood. I personally would prefer the residential set of requirements separated from this. So that way it's very clear to people who are applying that if they are in a residential area, here is the new set of conditions we would be looking for, instead of this dynamic display policy that we have today. Because this display policy we even applied to city businesses and White Bear Avenue and so on. So I would not want to mix it up with those commercial sites versus residential.
Yeah. And I agree with that too. We don't want a sign the size of 3M, you know, right next door. So there has to be separate code
Yep.
just for the R1s.
But they're in a residential area.
Grandfathered in.
I know the map did not show it very well on this PowerPoint just due to the size, but you did receive this map in your packet. The blue areas on this map are all institutional parcels within the city of Maplewood.
So how would we come up with the distance though? Because there has to be some flexibility there. Is it halfway between the structure and the street or something? Because you couldn't do 100 feet, because I know that between that and the building is about 100 feet, you know?
Yeah, and I think if that may be more decision-making when they bring the CUP to the planning commission, and not cast in concrete that it's got to be 100 feet, for example. You could recommend and say, we'd look at minimum 50 feet from a residential wall home. And then be a little more flexible on how it would sit and where it would sit, because at that point, the planning commission can make some decisions.
But isn't that then, once we say 50 feet, then they can go to that 50 feet though?
Minimum 50 feet.
But that means they can go to that 50 feet though. So that can be scary.
Well, if you look at the homes, what is the distance from the city street to the home?
Probably average 30, isn't it?
30 feet?
Yeah,
And the street is 20 feet wide,
yeah,
so that's 50 right there.
yeah.
So then we should maybe come up with, it should be no less than 75 feet.
From the front of the home.
Yeah. That's where some statistics from the city would be beneficial for us to make that decision as to what should be that distance. We just walked through an example, but again, is that practical? Are all homes average 30 feet or not? Because that may decide in each applicant's case where it would go.
Just wanted, you got me thinking about something, because in Roseville, they have, the way that they address dynamic displays is they're approved with a master sign plan. And right now, we have a comprehensive sign plan process where our design review board reviews those. And, you know, speaking of, you know, obviously, each property is going to have different standards that are kind of general standards, but if you wanted to review the CD individually, and then you could look at negotiating some of those requirements with them during that process. Like, for example, in the city of Roseville, it says site standards outlined, but can be negotiated during design plan approval.
That's what Roseville says? That's what
Yeah.
Roseville says?
Yep, on
Yeah.
page 3, or one as it's called.
Setbacks, and, I mean, they have general guidelines, but if you wanted to update, or, you know, look at each individual application, and then if it's practical, and you think it's a reasonable request based on the proximity to residential or something like that, that's another option. And it's kind of up to you, what you like to see, if you'd rather
Sure.
concrete standards in the code, or if you'd like to offer some type of flexibility.
Well, the flexibility you were talking about will come up during the conditional use permit. You know, that is where you address the flexibility.
Well,
So there's a standard, and then the flexibility will come up during the conditional use permit for each property that want to do that. That is how you address it. There will be a standard. The standard will be based on surrounding cities, you know, so to speak. Then, if you want to have any adjustment, that will come up during the conditional use permit, because you cannot generalize. I don't think so.
Yeah, but you still have to have, if you set standards, and you have to be careful that it's not too stringent, because then you're gonna,
That will be addressed during the conditional use, because you're talking about the physical land, you know. So when you see that, that is when you make the adjustment for that for that application.
but then you can't state a distance, and you have to say that it'll be negotiable during the,
No, they have a specific area. You have a specific area, and you want to place an object, right? So it's what is allowed within that specific area that will determine where that requirement will go in terms of your application. And that is not different from what we have now in the city of Maplewood. The only difference is that we are going from non-digital to digital, you know, and then how the ambient and light and all that adjustment. That is it. So if you review the existing ones, and that will give us a leeway to see how the new ones can be implemented.
It sounds like you just want to know if we're interested in doing this, right?
no, she wants feedback too.
Well, feedback too, but
Chair and commission, both, yes.
Yeah,
If
but
it's
I
something
mean-
you want to pursue, and if you have specific requirements you'd like to see in the ordinance.
yeah. So if we cherry picked the other ordinances from other surrounding communities and gave that back to you and say it is something that we're interested in doing, then you would formulate this as a ordinance and bring it back to the planning commission then for public hearing?
That's essentially correct, yes. So
Okay.
I would like your feedback tonight. If you have specific things you'd like us to address, I've already taken some notes on some of it. And so we'll add those items for sure in a draft ordinance. And obviously, I'm getting the feedback that it is something you'd like us to bring back. So if there are any other specifics, that's what I would like to know.
Bear Lake has 100 feet from a dwelling unit. I think that's probably a good start. It says that unless it's not visible, you know, from that dwelling unit, so,
Is there, along the lines of what Alan was saying, is there a current ordinance or code that, you know, not talking about LED signs, but just monuments or something, you know, that they would place, that they have to follow?
Yes. Chair and commission, yes. So each individual district has standards, as it is right now, for how large of a size, or what the size of a sign that's allowed, as well as the height and the distance and everything. And each district has different standards.
Now, what is the benefit of the sign continually changing? I don't see that's, I don't know that we would need that, because it seems like that's kind of strange that if, like on there, they were showing the time and the date, why would that need to change every 25 seconds? I guess that doesn't make sense to me.
I'll let the applicants maybe answer some of those questions.
But that's what a lot of them say on here, that they don't want the sign to stay for longer than so many seconds, and it needs to change.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Chair and Commission, I think what you're referring to is the many cities, I think all of them, for the most part, had a standard of how long certain things could be up there. So for example, the time and temperature, it was very common to see that time and temperature could change more frequently versus a message. Usually those would have to be up longer. It's not the case in every city, but that is what some cities have chosen to do.
Now, to me, that would be more of a distraction, because if it's got the lights there and then it changes a flashing of a different thing, then it becomes more distractive because it's changing more frequent. If it stays the same for a long period of time, it's not as distracting, but
That's correct. I think it would be, if it's something you guys are interested in, I mean, I think it would be appropriate to have some type of time limit on there, whatever you think is appropriate.
There is a purpose for the sign, right?
For the
Anybody that make application for the sign, we have a purpose for the sign, right? And the message that the sign will convey, right? Something they want to get out there, that they are even getting out now, but the only that is going to be digital, right? This time around. And there is going to be time elements to this. This is the purpose of the sign that we're talking about. Those things, I believe, will be addressed when they come in for the conditional use. They will spell that out, why they want to have new device instead of the old one. What are they not getting? I mean, we are here for their own benefits, you know what I'm saying? So they need to they spell that out. That is what is going to take into consideration either location, the size, the color, or whatever. You have a purpose for the sign. That is why you are making an application.
But we have to have standards. That'd be like saying somebody come in and want to build a house and we don't have anything built, and we have to come through and they build a house and say, well, we don't know yet. If you just show us what you got and we'll okay it. Well, they have to have standards to set the baseline.
Yeah, there is an existing standard. There's existing standard. Only the standard will have to be updated to reflect the current condition of the application that we're talking about, going from design A to B. There's an existing standard. So the new implication or the new addition have to be revised to fit the new application.
But you're thinking that we should have them come before and be able to go and just decide nearly whatever we want to do here and for whatever there's. Is that what I'm understanding? That we decide, well, yeah, if you want it that way, we can put it that way or this way or this way? Is that kind of what you're saying? Or?
No, not deviating from the standard. No, that is not the case. Again, it's required. They're going to have, it's a conditional use permit, right? To have it done.
If that's the route that that the commission would like to see.
Well,
that's
that
one
is
option.
my understanding. Yeah, city of Roseville and other cities, communities, is based on the conditional use permit, right?
I believe City of Roseville, instead they have them approve a master sign plan for the parcel.
Okay.
So it'd be similar, like I said, how we have our comprehensive sign plans, which are reviewed by the design review board. So that, again, that's another route you could take, is
Yeah.
they could not come to you at all if you don't want them to be processed through a conditional use
There we
permit.
go. Put it on their back.
I'm just saying, we do have a comprehensive sign plan process in our ordinance, and so it could be addressed that way as well, if that's a route you'd like it to go.
All in favor?
They're overwhelmed. Cheryl, you're quiet.
Huh?
You have anything, Cheryl?
I think I've said what I was looking for, so
Okay.
we get that data, then we can make a better decision.
So, no suggestions?
I would just
I think-
echo my, suggestion earlier that the standard does have some things around audio and like special effects. I think those are some things that were pretty consistent throughout everything else that should be in this standard.
You mean like the fireworks and things on the?
Yeah, like things that strobe and like, not just changing messages, but like.
And music and things like that,
Yeah.
we don't want all
Yeah.
those.
I
so-
think just putting those things in there so it's, one less thing we have to discuss in the future.
And you guys are all good.
No Halloween signs and things like that on it.
Trumpets and
Yeah.
flags, I think, flying, yeah. Yeah, I think that it's okay that, you put that all together for us, then I think that seems like that's the best direction to go, that we have a standard. But I don't know what we should do about the timeliness of the school right now.
Chair and Commission, before we move on to that, I just wanted to clarify one thing. So right now, our dynamic display ordinance does not require a conditional use permit for commercial uses or the industrial uses. So they just need to meet the standards that are outlined.
Is there anything wrong with them?
Well,
My question for you is, do you want this to then go on to say, if you are in a residential area and you are a permitted institutional use, such as a residential, or excuse me, a religious or educational facility, you need to obtain a conditional use permit, and here are the standards for the residential dynamic displays? Or would you like to see something that says, if you are in the same thing, if you're in a residential area and you're in an approved institutional use, you need to obtain a comprehensive sign plan?
And that would mean that they
I
could,
want to clarify that point, because I'm a
well,
little
it sounds like,
confused about.
I think I would want that we would have something separate for residential. So a whole separate
Right, I
segment.
understand you want different standards, so
Yeah.
the commercial standards will likely just stay the same. I don't think we'll change anything. And if that's something at the meeting you want to discuss, we can, but, I mean, for now, we won't adjust those. We will just develop a draft ordinance to address the residential zoning district. I guess I just want to clarify if you want this to be brought as a conditional use permit, or if you think it'd be more appropriate as a comprehensive sign plan.
so I guess some of the people's feedback, what you're asking then is just to have kind of a broad spectrum of what they can do and bring it before us and approve it, or we have some standards. Is that kind of what you're asking? Yeah?
That's, yes, Chair and Commission, that's essentially what I'm asking. Is I'm curious how detailed you want the standards to be, or if you want it to be reviewed by the Design Review Board. Do you want it to come to you? And if you want specific standards, or if you want those to be negotiated, like a comprehensive sign plan sort of is, you know?
I think more, we want to make sure that the neighbors are aware of what's going on. However that happens, if that's through CDRB, conditional use, whatever, we just want to make sure that the public's aware that there's going to be a new sign in their neighborhood. And the same notification process you do for other things for a CUP.
And I believe I can confirm that a comprehensive sign plan
Would not.
would require a public hearing, correct?
No, I don't think so.
Really?
Just a CUP.
Because I know I
Just a
brought an
CUP.
amendment, and I thought we did a public hearing for it.
I think we did a public hearing for AT&T over there on White Bear when they wanted to add additional sign. You remember?
Yep.
It was said that they cannot have more than 2 signs. They were asking for 3, and we made a decision that they cannot have more than 2. That was-
You know how they solved that?
Oh, yeah.
They put up a
don't
truck
have
there.
more than 2.
They put up a truck.
Yeah, they don't have more than 2. So, and for instance, some of the signs in the mall are grandfathered in. That is why the difference between White Bear, those lots on White Bear and in the mall. You remember that when we did that? Yeah.
so essentially your question is, should it be part of a CUP, or do you want it to be a permanent set of regulations that are in there, that the proposal comes in, you guys in the city review it and say, yep, it meets it, or just this or just that a little bit, and you would approve it without sending it to the planning commission?
Chair and
If you
Commission,
see
that is
this
correct.
dynamic display signs, as Ellen mentioned, they came to us for that AT&T sign when they were proposing to put 3 signs up there. So as I remember it, this request for signage like this did come to either a planning commission or a CDRB, one or the other. And last time, I think it even went to CDRB for that AT&T sign.
Before us.
Uh-huh. So in my mind, it should come here unless we see after you put a proposal together. This is again my opinion, I'm not talking for everyone else, but my opinion is that when you bring us a proposal, if we feel comfortable that this thing looks like it can stand on its own and not have any other overview, then yeah, we can leave it in this section that you have here for dynamic display signs with a separate section just for residential use.
With the CIP.
Chair and commission reviewed by the design review board or as a conditional use permit? Because a conditional use permit needs to
Comes
come to
here.
you and to the council.
Because it's a public.
Correct.
Correct.
Well, it requires a public hearing and,
Yep, and that's the direction I would go with the conditional use permit.
I agree.
Yep.
And we see a lot of that, right? The reason is that you have so many residential, single families surrounding a typical institution. So now we are giving them a leeway to say, okay, because they need to be notified for that change. So some of them will be coming in for sure. So, but we have to tell them that, yeah, it's been approved for that institution, a school, for them to get certain message, like go and get your COVID-19 shot, stuff like that, or you get $2 or something if you don't, to be out there so that they can be aware of it. I mean, the purpose of the sign is to give them awareness, and it can be of advantage to the residents too around that time. But an institution of learning, school, hospital, they are not isolated. They are surrounded by people or by buildings. So I think, so with that kind of condition, they should be able to come back to us to look at it so that we see the physical, the physical space that that application is going to occupy and all that stuff. I remember when they wanted to put the gas station over there on English. Mm-hmm. You remember the building across it was complaining about lights at night and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And they said, okay, have some evergreen trees over there. Because per zoning, that place is zoned to be commercial. You are residential across the street. There is nothing we can do about that. There's limitations, you know what I'm saying?
correct. I hear what you're saying. Chair and commission, and I think what might be a good idea is we'll craft something that will, there'll be a line that'll say, these can potentially, I don't know.
I think
I'll make it sound good.
Are you on the mic there? Are you on the mic?
Oh, yes, sorry, I forgot.
Because it's not us, it's the TV.
Right. So I think what the route that we're going to go then is we'll go with a conditional use permit, and we can craft some language in there. We'll have some general standards, but then there can be, we already have other areas in our code I've noticed where, there can be some negotiation with certain reviews. So I think in this situation, it would make sense to have a line in there that says the setbacks, for example. I think that would probably be the only thing. I don't think we'd really want to negotiate necessarily,
The brightness.
the brightness. I think that's, maybe we should agree on a standard for the residential area, but maybe the setbacks could be negotiated based on the specific site, but have a general setback to start with, So, okay.
So we can email you any other suggestions that we think too, that we should be, as you write it, to present to us.
I think that's appropriate, yes.
Okay.
So maybe a quick question. The current process, if the school wanted to put up just a regular lighted sign with the letters that you put up on the sign, do they have to have a CUP for that?
Chair and commission, no, and they currently can do that.
So it's just adding the dynamic display that they would have to.
In this situation, if that's the
cross
route
over.
we're going to proceed with, yes, it would be the dynamic display portion.
Okay. Can we have them come up for a second too then and
Certainly.
ask a couple questions with them too?
I will say this was sent to the CDRB as well. I don't believe anyone has shown up tonight, but they have the option to send comments to us as well, so
Okay.
we'll work on getting something put together.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, you have to pass that around.
And again, check. Check, I haven't given you the bill.
Awesome. Take that one. Commissioners, thanks for hearing us tonight. I'm Randy Anderson from the school district. We appreciate the time tonight and the discussion. Just a couple of things. I think everybody knows that we're in the process of renovating all of our district schools. When the process is all done, it's going to be about $400 million, and so it'll have touched almost every school in the district. So one of the things we wanted, or that we have went down the road, is these dynamic signs, district standards. As you can kind of see, they're nice signs, they're brick. The illumination is not during the evening.
I
Okay,
mean,
thank
none
you.
at all, zero.
Pardon me?
Zero light at nighttime.
Zero light at night.
Okay.
So these would not be something that would, go into your resident's house. These are turned off, and they are only illuminated during the daytime, okay? As was spoken here before, it's about giving information to the public and about events, open houses, different types of things that are occurring at the schools. Could be even an Amber Alert, could maybe even be a community event, whatever. So again, as we moved forward with these signs, we worked with the city of North St. Paul and Oakdale, and of course came up with some specifics, all right? And again, the size of the sign, the size of the looms, nits, when the signs can be on, so that's not a distraction, how long the sign has to remain on, and so forth. So other than that, we put these signs up. They are in residential areas right now. The 3 buildings in Maplewood that we are looking at putting signs and placing signs are at Carver and also at John Glenn, and then the new Justice Ellen Page Elementary, which is currently at the Maplewood Middle School site. Okay, so we'd like to keep some consistency across the district if we can, and that's why we're here before you tonight, is to hopefully advocate and work with you folks, collaborate, so that we can have some of the same things that we have at our other schools. So I don't know if you guys want to say anything more than that.
Sure, I'll just make a comment. I'm Sal Bagley. I work at Wold Architects and Engineers, so I, along with the school district, helped put together the application. I think it's important to note that I think it's in our application or in your packet, but all 3 instances are proposed to be perpendicular to the road, so not parallel or facing any homeowner property. So it would be that you can see it from driving both directions. All 3 of them in this particular proposal are not on corners. So when somebody said one person's parallel is another perpendicular, actually that wouldn't apply here. So they'd all be perpendicular to the road and not facing any homeowners. So, but obviously you'd have that option to look at the specific geometry when conditional use permit time came.
And just one other comment, when we went through these process at the other schools, we have not had any complaints from homeowners. I guess actually we had one, and that was the sign wasn't going off early enough. So we made that adjustment.
Would you be using this for community ed events too?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, what about the length of time that it's on? Is that?
We're willing to work with you. We're doing things right now. It would be nice if we had something in place by.
Are you talking about length of time a message can stay up or
Yeah, both.
construction timeline?
But that's both questions. too.
Oh, okay.
I interpreted it differently.
Yes, that's a two-question part.
You're going to get a twofer, I guess.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
well, I think in general, most cities have
30
ordinances
seconds,
about the minimum amount of time something has to be displayed to avoid distractions to drivers, right? Because if you see something out of the corner of your eye. And many cities actually have restrictions on the transition, so it can't do a fade or an explosion or a spin into change. So I would say that'd be pretty typical. I think the city of Oakdale is a minimum of 30 seconds.
Yep.
And then I think it's White Bear does not allow any animated changes. So if it goes from one message to the next, it can't, spin into place or fireworks, I think somebody said.
So there's no on the length of the long, it's just the short, right?
Correct.
So you can
Yep.
have it on there for 5 hours.
Sure.
Sure,
Okay.
if there was only one event that you were broadcasting, it might be up all day.
Okay.
And then usually you're allowed to change the time and the temperature more frequently, right? So that the time is actually accurate, because if you can only change it every 5 minutes, then the time is wrong 4 out of those 5 minutes or something like that. But Yeah, so I would say that's pretty common.
Yep.
And then maybe I'll answer the other question when it comes to construction. I think the process you're considering, I think works pretty well, actually.
Yep.
So all 3 projects are planned to be complete next school year, so summer or fall of '22.
Year from now.
Yeah, about a year from now. So if we go through this, your process about a month from now, and then formalizing at a city council, and then the conditional use permit process, I would say that would put us into November or December of this year. And I think that would work fine for construction. So no issues at this time.
Okay, good.
And we'd
So-
probably come with all 3 at one meeting. We'd apply
Yeah.
all 3 CUPs all at once.
You have not had any complaint from a senior citizen for the 30 minutes? He said you're going to be on for 30 minutes. If I'm driving by and I'm driving by and the sign is on for 30 minutes, have you had any complaint from senior citizens for not being able to read it?
No, none yet.
I'm just,
Are you having problems?
Anybody
that's why-
stopping their car to read the sign?
Possibly.
Maybe, I don't know.
Actually, some cities have minimum text size requirements too, to avoid you putting up a whole paragraph, right? So it's 1 or 2 lines of
7
text, or at
7
least the
inches.
size, or,
And Oakdale does have those requirements. too.
yep, so we've
I
had to
thi-
comply
I think
with that.
that'd be, Elizabeth, that'd be good something for us too, is we're 7 to 5 or something, was it, or?
I don't remember the city of Oakdale, but yeah, there's a minimum letter size.
Yeah, it's,
I think I remember 7.
Yeah, that might be right. And the illumination, the nits in Oakdale, there's like a daytime, and then there's a sunrise and sunset, and then nothing overnight. So they actually have 3
Oh, wow, okay.
settings. So it's like when the sun is fully up, and then when it's dusk or early day, and then overnight is no illumination, so.
Good.
I think that's defined as 10 to 6
Yep.
is, yeah.
Nothing.
Yes.
So even when there are parent-teacher meetings and things like that, which is in the dark, there are that sign is not illuminated in those hours?
I think during sunrise and sunset, it's allowed to be at 250 nits.
Right.
But between 10 PM and 6 AM, which I would say it'd be rare you'd have an event.
Yeah.
You won't.
Overnight,
have
so to
past
speak, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
so you
It
can
would be
go up
out.
to 10 PM, which is
Correct.
kind of important, because if parent-teacher meetings and things like that, you'd want that lighted up at that time.
So then the other thing would be off at nighttime, right, is kind of basically.
10 to 6, it's a good time
So
to be
yeah,
off.
many cities require that, not all of them, but.
Yep, yep.
That's all I got.
Any other questions?
What's your name?
Oh, I'm Mike Bullen. I'm.
Okay.
Mike's the
Operations
operations supervisor in charge of construction.
Yep,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I recognized you, but I
Yes,
just couldn't
I've
remember.
been here before, so, thanks, Paul.
A couple other conditional use permits.
Yeah.
Sounds good, thanks.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it.
okay. I
Any other
think that,
questions for me, Chair and Commission?
thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate your time.
I think then if we're not, on a time schedule with that, then it wouldn't hurt to have this all, go through all this then.
I think you're right. I was under the impression, based on all the sign permits they've been submitting, that they were in a hurry to get this going.
Right, they're
But
just good
It
planners.
sounds like their timeline is a little longer than I anticipated, so I
Yeah.
think we have plenty of time to think this through.
exactly.
We
Get
can
it
extend
together.
their application to make sure that we meet our state statute requirements for our review period and figure something out and bring it to you next month.
Okay,
So
and then,
Thank you.
if you
and
have
then
any other thoughts, let us know.
a few of us here that are interested in having a guide for what we'll email you or call you or whatever too, so. Okay, Sean, are you up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. So I believe we are on review of Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area and Slopes and Bluffs ordinances, our next item. Although I found the sign code discussion riveting, really, I helped craft the sign ordinance back in the day, and the dynamic display piece came when the city of Maplewood put that dynamic display sign at our community center. And that kind of all related to Clear Channel and them putting up dynamic displays. So, but a lot of technology has changed since then, so it's good to take a look at that, so.
Is it a wise spent of money, though, they're expensive?
Well, I think they're becoming more cost-effective, and that's why we're seeing more of these requests, from places like churches and schools. So, anyway, thanks for having me. So, I see some new faces here. My name is Sean Finwall. I'm the environmental planner with the City of Maplewood, and I have been working with our Environmental Commission over the last almost year, I guess, on the Mississippi Corridor Critical Area Ordinance. So I do have a short presentation for you, and tonight our ask is just kind of for the Planning Commission to take a broad-based look at this new ordinance, because there's a lot of detail, and give me any comments and feedback. And then we are required to do a public hearing, which will come back to you next month. So with this presentation, feel free to stop me at any point. But I'll just briefly go over, the ordinance and the makeup of the ordinance. So background for you. Maplewood does have an MRCCA and a slopes ordinance, and these were both adopted in the 1970s. And that's likely the time that the state adopted rules for the MRCCA, the original rules. So in January of 2017, the state did adopt new MRCCA rules, and now all local governments within that corridor are required to update the ordinance. And the deadline for the city of Maplewood is October 1st. So when they notify you, you're given a year to update your ordinance, and they notified us last October. So the area in Maplewood is relatively small, considering the entire range of the corridor. In Maplewood, we have about 145 acres, and that's located on our south leg of the city. It's located south of Carver Avenue and generally west of 494. It includes 35 single-family homes that are zoned residential, and it also includes a lot of open space, both the county and the Fish Creek, the city's open space site. So about 75% of that is open space. And the Environmental Commission took a tour, so I'm going to take you through the tour because this is kind of fun. So this will show you what we're really trying to preserve out there, because there's a lot of hidden gems there. So I hope that you have taken a hike at the new Fish Creek Neighborhood Preserve. Well, it's not that new anymore, a couple years old, but there's a lot of great trails that lead up to a bluff, and it overlooks, and you can actually see the river from some of those vantage points. However, none of the river, Mississippi River, actually touches Maplewood borders, but we are within that bluff land. So this you can see, you can walk along that Fish Creek. There's a rustic trail. It's really kind of a fun ravine down in there, and there's a lot of interesting things to see, wildlife. So here's a couple pictures for you on the trails in Fish Creek. You can see that overlook that actually looks out onto probably Minneapolis there. And then the ravine, cuts into some of that rock formations, and of course there's a lot of wildlife in there. So it's a really beautiful area and a lot to preserve. And we did a great job preserving a majority of that with the Ramsey County and Fish Creek open space sites. But we are required to update this ordinance. And here's the timeline that we're looking at. So again, we were notified in October. So the Environmental Commission looked at the MRCCA ordinance. They drafted that over a couple of months. Then we decided, you know what, we really need to take a look at our slopes ordinance. We have a slope ordinance currently, and that covers all of Maplewood, not just the MRCCA district. But we wanted to make sure that language in that ordinance was consistent with the MRCCA. We sent the draft ordinances to the DNR. They're taking a preliminary review of that. We did some education and outreach. We included an article in our Maplewood Living on the new ordinance, as well as did a direct mailing to those 35 single-family homes that, might be impacted by some of these changes. And we have not heard any public comment back from those notices, so I don't think they have too many concerns, and you'll see why, because I think there's a lot of protections in place for those existing homes. Brought it to the Environmental Commission last night, and they recommended approval of that, of both of those ordinances, bringing it to you here tonight for the preliminary review. We are required to have that public hearing, so it'll come before you in September, with City Council holding that final approval end of September and off to the DNR so we can meet our timeline. So the DNR did include a model ordinance for use by local governments. It was like, 12 pages. And there's a lot of things in there that relate to protecting the river and shore impact zones, things like that, things that wouldn't apply here in Maplewood. So we really had to kind of condense it, take out those portions of that model ordinance that didn't pertain to natural resources that we actually have in our corridor. But the regulations do help guide development in the MRCCA, and then also takes a look at vegetative management within that corridor. So again, the MRCCA, it is an overlay district, so everything underneath that existing zoning would remain. And again, we have that single-family zoning as well as the guided land use of open space.
How bad is the buckthorn down there?
Buckthorn in, Fish Creek, we are managing that, doing some natural resources improvements down there. But I would imagine some of those households, especially on the slopes, probably have a lot of buckthorn.
Right.
Yeah. And that's some of the, maybe what we'd see for vegetative management. Maybe a household would want to remove, a whole slope of buckthorn, which is great, but, it could cause erosion, and we'd want to see what type of planting materials they'd reestablish. So the ordinance itself includes definitions, new definitions that were outlined in the model ordinance. And I think the two biggest things to look at are the definition for a bluff, which generally speaking, a bluff is 25 feet high and 18% grade. And the only place that we have bluffs in Maplewood is, we don't know exactly for sure, but we think it's in that MRCCA. The DNR has done an extensive GIS mapping in the corridor, but we don't know exactly throughout Maplewood. We do have many steep slopes in Maplewood, particularly in the south leg, even outside of the MRCCA. But a slope then is defined as it has to be a certain length, which is 50 feet, and then the grade is 12 to 18%. So that's the difference between a bluff and a slope.
I thought a bluff also had to overlook water.
No, not necessarily.
Really?
The sections in the ordinance generally is, it goes into, enforcement of the ordinances. Then there's administration. It talks about conditions of approval for permits, variances, conditional use permits, regulations on nonconformities, and a lot of this stuff, we might not see because, again, we only have 35 single-family homes, and we don't have land to develop. But who knows, maybe someday a developer will come in and buy all 35 homes and want to develop something. So, we're required to have that language in there. And then it talks about the MRCCA district. So in the new rules, they define different districts for different areas. And in Maplewood, we're defined as rural and open space. So that's basically single-family homes and open space. But as an example, Minneapolis and St. Paul, who of course are still in the corridor, they're all designed, I'm sure, designated as urban. And, they have different regulations there for that type of land use.
What is the county's property that you said was in there? What are they using it for?
Well, it's just open space right now. We did and hope to continue to coordinate with them on the Fish Creek and the trails. I think there's some overlap in the trails there, but right now they just manage it as a natural area.
Could that possibly be developed?
Well, currently it's not guided to be developed, and if the county
Okay.
ever were to sell it, we'd have to go through the whole process of rezoning, re-guiding, and,
Okay. Yep.
as we've seen with the Ponds Golf Course, things like that could happen, I guess, but currently, no. It goes into detail on the structure, height, and placement, and the one thing, and this is probably the biggest change from our current MRCCA ordinance, which, by the way, is only about a page long, to the new ordinance, which now, I don't know, 6 pages or something, is the setback to the bluff. And we used to have a 40-foot setback, and this new ordinance would require 100 feet. And I estimate that 18 of those 35 single-family homes are built closer than, are near the bluff, and they're built closer than that 100 feet. They're probably 40 feet right now. So those are considered pre-existing non-conforming. But again, this ordinance has some safety nets built in for those types of homes, and I'll go into those briefly. They have the performance standards, and that's for private and public facilities, like where you can place roads, what you can do in parks, right-of-ways and utilities. And then this is another big change, is this vegetation management, which I guess it's not really that big a change. But they talk about requiring a vegetation management permit whenever there's intensive vegetation removal, which is, all the trees or all the shrubs or a majority of the trees or shrubs in a row or block. They don't really define an area. But, we as a city would require a grading permit for that, if it was on a slope or bluff anyway. So I did ask the DNR, what does this mean? Is this a new permit for the city? And they said, well, you can call it whatever you want. We just want to make sure you're reviewing it and then making sure the vegetation removal is meeting these standards, and ensuring that they're reestablishing and so forth. So we already have that process in place with our grading permits. So that's what we would do. And then I asked, well, does the city have to get a permit? Does the county have to get a permit? And, it's just so that the city's having an overview of the proposal and meeting our comprehensive plan and so forth. So we won't necessarily give ourselves a permit, but we'll make sure we're abiding by the rules, like everyone else. Then it goes into land alteration, talking about stormwater and water quality, and then subdivision and land development. And again, we likely won't see this in our corridor for a long time. And then exemptions, things that, are exempt from the ordinance. And then here's what I included for the 35 single-family homes, and I think this is kind of key for the changes to our ordinance. And these are the major changes that may affect a single-family home. So principal and accessory structures setbacks to bluffs. Again, it's 100 foot. Previously, it was 40. But they can also, let's say an unfortunate incident, one of the homes was destroyed, and they wanted to rebuild. But, they don't have the room for a 100-foot setback. But the houses on either side of them are already set back, 40 feet to the bluff. This code would allow them to build, with the adjoining lots, similar to what we allow now for front yard setbacks. You can't be any closer to the front or any further back than your adjoining neighbors. So it's similar situation there. And then it also has an allowance for accessory structures under 200 square feet and decks. They can, in addition, encroach 15% into the required setback. Our current ordinance doesn't allow that, so it builds in more.
So you're saying that 15% of that structure can be within that, under that 100 feet, is that what that?
It can encroach 15% into the required setback. So can you do the math? What's 15% of 100?
15. So you can go 15 feet into.
Yeah. 15 feet closer. Again, this vegetation removal permit, because right now we don't necessarily require that for single-family homes, but I guess there could be an instance where they wanted to, remove an entire slope or the bluff line of buckthorn, and again, it'd be this grading permit. And then nonconformities, homes and garages that were built closer to the bluff than the new regulations allow, and again, I think there's about 18 out there right now. All legally established nonconforming structures may remain, and of course, our current nonconforming ordinance allows that too. But then all legally established nonconforming principal structures and decks may be expanded laterally. And I know we have this in our wetland ordinance, like if a home is built closer to the wetland than our current wetland buffer would allow, they can build, sideways as long as they're not getting any closer to that wetland. It would be the same for the bluff then as well. And we don't have that in our current ordinance. So the ordinance in and of itself adds some additional protections really for those single-family homes to make sure that their homes are remaining livable, and they can expand, but still protecting those bluffs.
So let me clarify that again too. So if the house was under the 100 feet, let's say they're at 85 feet from it, they could still build on the side of their house and still be okay. They wouldn't have to step back that 15 feet.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's kind of a brief update of the MRCCA. And then, again, we also decided to take a look at the slope ordinance. And this would apply to, anywhere in the city of Maplewood where there's a natural slope. And if you think of like Beaver Creek and that big ravine, a lot of homes are built up to Beaver Creek. I don't know if you're familiar with that area, but that's a steep slope. And there's probably others out there. So what are we protecting? We want to protect those slopes, make sure they don't erode and so forth. So in this ordinance, we made sure the definitions were consistent with the MRCCA. Again, findings and purpose to define, why are we creating this ordinance?
Yeah, there is no slope on clearance, is there?
Say again?
Is there any slope on clearance?
Clearance.
That's where I live.
No, it's pretty flat there.
Yeah, there is a slope from the, yeah, there's a big bluff and I'm in my card games.
I'm going to check that out tomorrow.
There is a slope from the railroad, from the bike path up to my,
Oh, yeah, those railroad, of course, those aren't naturally occurring.
right,
Those
so I'm okay.
railroad. Yeah, just don't,
Okay. Look at that.
dig into that slope. Then structure placement. Now, here's something that would be new. And I think I threw it in because we required 40 feet from the MRCCA and from bluffs in the past. Why don't we have a setback to slopes? So I was considering adding this 40-foot setback. But the DNR, I asked them for their opinion on it, and they said, depends why you're requiring this setback. Is it to protect views, so that when people look up a slope, there's not a giant house just up there? Or is it, to protect the slope itself so it doesn't erode? So I guess we have to define why we're doing this. And I think it would put some of our homes maybe as pre-existing non-conforming. The Beaver Creek example, years ago we brought the Environmental Commission out for a slope tour. It was pretty exciting. We went to that Beaver Creek ravine, and a lot of those garages are built like 5 feet away from that steep slope, which, is that bad? Might be bad for looking across, and seeing the view of just a garage. So that's something that I'm going to work with our engineers on and see if that makes sense, and if you have any comments on that as we discuss.
Well, the IBC, the code book, there's a section in there that talks about the distance that it has to be from slopes and that too.
Okay, the building code.
For the code.
Good to know. And then it goes on to land alteration, again, stormwater management, vegetation management, and erosion control and soils. And our engineers have looked at this code and find it acceptable. They had a few questions and changes. So here's a fun picture of, why we're protecting slopes. If you don't protect them, they could erode away and slide down the hill. So you can see the importance of an ordinance like this. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, comments, so that we're prepared when we come back for our public hearing.
So those 35 houses over there, do they obtain approval before they are constructed?
Is your mic on now?
Those 35 buildings over there, they got approval before they were.
Correct, those were all approved with building permits.
I was just wondering, in terms of erosion, and when you said some of the garages are at the tip of the slope, over the years, has there been any erosion, landslide, or anything from the slope? Or have they experienced anything?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Ige, did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Okay. In the MRCCA area, I don't think there's any garages that are that close. I was referring to another area in the city, but there has never, I've worked for the city for 20 years, and I've never seen an issue where an existing structure collapsed. But, we are seeing changing climate and
That's right.
changing, so there could be, a 200-year rain and could wash away a garage.
I bet you if you went and looked, there probably is some cracks in that and a little bit of settling to the rear.
Yeah.
It's pretty
So
common.
Do they have to be reviewed, looked at, or for the disaster or something, now that we are on the slopes, on the bluff, rather?
Grandfathered in.
Their non-conforming use is what they call it then.
Yeah. About their safety, if they, if it has to be looked at over the years, I'm pretty sure with sometimes some of them will be doing some rehabilitations too, and altering the land use or the composition of the land too, or the garages or the houses or the buildings too. I'm kind of surprised that they only allow 40 feet, but they don't have enough space in the bluff for 100 feet, so they cannot build back, right?
Right, those lots, there's not enough room for them to maintain a 100-foot setback.
Okay.
The house would be right up to the front property line, probably.
Okay, so,
If you want to see a garage that's starting to do that, is right on the top of the hill at County Road C, on the south, on the north end there. There's a garage there that's right on the slope, real steep slope there, and you can see it starting to. They patch it. Second or third house from the. We're across from Bittersweet. County Road C, Bittersweet. Yeah.
I want to take a picture of that
Yeah, if you
for
see
our
you can see the
presentation
foundation.
purposes.
Yeah, the foundation is starting. They've fixed it all the time because it's kind of
Oh,
sliding
oh,
down.
no.
yeah, you see, that's what I'm saying. It was time.
But they also had that problem out in, off of Victoria and 694, 694. The whole development there started to slide down the hill,
Right. I have seen that in other cities.
right?
I think you did a good job. There, I'll say it again. I think you did a good job.
Yeah,
I'm on the
thank
mic.
you very much. It's very, very educating for me.
So Sean, the only question, and not regarding this particular ordinance, are those 35 homes allowed to sell to another party? Or is there a restriction that when the current owner is done, it goes back to the state or to any entity?
No, they can sell.
They can sell it?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Of course, Maplewood does have a truth in housing code, but it identifies mainly the building code issues, and so they do have to do that so that a new owner could see if there's any problems. And of course, anyone who purchases a home should do their due diligence and figure out what zone it's in and so forth. We hope people do that. But no, there's no restriction on the sale of their home.
I think he's talking like when they have like the 100-year flood and they keep on building those houses in that area, and then finally they say, no, not enough, we're going to buy your house. You know, that's kind of what you're referring to, right?
Plus, in some federal lands, if there is an existing home, the current owner can keep it, but as soon as they are done, that house reverts back to the government.
No, nothing like that here.
Okay.
The root beer lady on the Boundary Waters.
Yeah, exactly same.
Anybody have any questions?
Nope.
Nope.
Pretty good.
All right, well, thank you so much for
Thank you.
your time, and we'll be back next month, and we will have notified the 35 households about the public hearing, as well as published it in the newspaper.
So do you foresee any issues with them? Because everything is pretty, I mean, they don't, I mean, if they went and cleared their backyard, might be the only really big issue, but you don't foresee anything that they have any problems with this, right? Because it's pretty basic.
Yeah, I haven't heard from any of the homeowners,
Okay.
except one who wanted to let me know they moved. But I had sent to the resident and the property owners, so I know the person living there received the notice. So clearly, they don't have too many concerns.
Okay. Good, good.
Interesting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. Okay, we are at G, unfinished business. Elizabeth, any unfinished business? Visitors' presentations? Commissioners' presentations? Oh, I guess we did want to question the approvals, what approved from our meeting last time, the house that had the access to the lake, and then what was the other one that we had a couple people that they came before us. Does anybody else remember? It was the one on the lake. They wanted that narrow drive, Edgerton, narrow driveway, and then the other one was the garage.
Change off of Keller.
Oh, and that was on,
It was on Edgerton,
no, it was on Payne.
yeah.
Arcade.
So do you know if
Yeah,
it went to the
Arcade,
city-
yeah.
Went to the city council?
Right, so Chair and Commission, so you're just wondering what the status is or what happened?
Correct.
Okay. So for the 2134 Arcade conditional use permit and variance, that was approved by the city council. For that one, it was a 5-foot setback variance off the side lot line, if you recall, and then a conditional use permit to exceed the maximum allowable square footage for an accessory structure. And then the other one, 2010 Edgerton, is actually coming back to the city council at a later date. It will not be going next week. The council discussed the item at length and decided to table it for the time being and requested some additional information from the applicant. So they've requested grading and erosion control information and more information on where they want to place the home. So if the variance is approved, they don't want to come into a situation where the variance is approved, the lot split occurs, and then they submit house plans, and we find out that it doesn't meet other ordinances. So I think that is the line of thinking that the council has. There's no guarantee that they're going to approve it or anything like that. They've just requested additional information, and they're taking the time to think about it. We do have a council member here. I don't know if you have anything to chime in on that, but that's what I know. I was not at the meeting, but I did meet with Jeff afterwards. And then in addition to that, Jeff and I are going to meet with the applicants, and tomorrow, actually, just to make sure they understand what they need to resubmit. So once we get that updated information from the applicant, it will go on the next council agenda for final consideration, so.
Because I thought they already had that pretty well figured out with the grade, not the grading, but the location of the house where it was going to be relative to the lake shore, and I thought they were all far enough away, but they just wanted to know more about the grading.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay.
And to clarify that there wouldn't be any work in the setback that's required from the wetland and the shoreland there. So they just want more detail.
Thank you.
Actually, I have one more question, sorry, because I think we all received the email. Is there any update on the development on Maplewood Drive and County Road C? The apartment
What
building?
email did you receive?
Oh, I assumed the staff was copied on it as well. There was a resident that had emailed all of the commissioners around the proposed development, voicing their objection to it, even though that it had already been approved.
I am unaware of that email. I was not copied on it.
I can forward it to you,
Okay.
just so you can see it too.
An
There might
apartment-
have been others, maybe Jeff or Mike were copied on it. I'm not sure, but I did not see that email.
Well, didn't he just have questions?
I forwarded it to Mike and
Okay.
asked what project it was. And it's an apartment complex that's going to be going in on C by the mobile home park,
I'll look into it.
west of 61.
Okay.
It didn't have to come to us, so.
Well, I think they said it to design review too, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I had sent it, and he had emailed me back and said you weren't the one I needed to talk to. So, no, I wasn't the one. Because he actually called me too. So. Any staff presentations? Nothing?
Nothing more from us.
Anybody in the audience want to do anything? Want to tap dance or anything? Okay, motion to adjourn then. Thank you.